Okay, so I am going to cover the PowerPoint on the basics of a literature review for you all. This is the first thing you should be addressing in this module too. It's going to be the basis of this literature review quiz that you have to take. This will be your virtual assignment for this week of March 11th or March 10th, excuse me, due on Thursday, March 13th. So this quiz is going to ensure that you watched this video that covers the basic PowerPoint on literature review. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. Let me go ahead and click into our PowerPoint and open it up. So this assignment, this literature review, is an assignment you are going to be asked to do in college and beyond. And it's not going to be like anything you've done up to this point. It does do research. Its foundation is research, but it is not a traditional research paper. So let's go ahead and cover this PowerPoint so you all can get an idea about what you're going to do in Module 2, the literature review. All right. So what is a literature review? It is a structured summary of all existing research on a particular topic. It can exist as part of a larger research project. If you are an upperclassman, say at a university, say you're a biology major or a nursing major, and you are expected to do a research project, which is pretty typical. Before you can actually get into your research, you are going to get asked to do what's called a literature review. That literature review is going to ask you to go and find the research, all the research written on your very particular topic in order to survey what's been written, to identify the trends, the relationships, and the gaps in the current research. And again, as I said, this could be something that you're doing as part of a research project or as a standalone assignment, which is the case in this class. This is a standalone assignment. You will not be doing the research paper that might be associated with an assignment like this. All right, so first of all, we're going to talk about what it's not. So, literature review is not just a summary of one source after another. That would be an annotated bibliography. You will have to write an annotated bibliography as part of this literature review, just as you wrote an annotated bibliography for your literary analysis paper. Again, this is not an opinion piece. It's not an argument paper. In your English 111, you probably wrote some sort of argument research paper. You had to do research for it. But your goal in that paper was to try to prove a point. In this particular assignment, you will use research, but you aren't trying to do anything new. You aren't making a new claim about a particular topic. Again, it's not a collection of personal thoughts. It is a very objective paper. You aren't going to be writing what you think about this research. You aren't going to be writing what you think about this topic. You are going to be writing what actually has already been written on topics by experts in the field. Okay? So that brings us to what is this thing that we keep saying, literature? What do we mean by that? We do not mean literature in the same sense that we meant novels and short stories and plays and poetry and the things that we dealt with in the first half of the semester. In this particular case, when we say literature, what we mean is peer-reviewed journal articles, books, and credible studies that's been done by experts in their field. So you are going to look at articles written by social scientists like psychologists, sociologists, doctors, biologists, people who are experts in the field of the social sciences, education, medicine, those topics, psychology, those topics that I've said you can choose for this paper. Okay. You should have, if you haven't already, you should go look at the Monday announcement wherein I talk about the kinds of topics that are allowed in this paper. All right. And again, the literature is the research that's already been done on this topic. And this again is going to be the foundation of how you review, assess, and organize that literature. All right. So, why do we do this? Why do people write literature reviews? This is probably one of the most common types of research type papers that gets done in college and in graduate school. So, this is a really useful thing to learn on a basic level. It improves your understanding of the research topic. Okay. Oops, sorry. It demonstrates to your instructor that you are knowledgeable on your subject. In terms of for the reader, what that does is it informs the reader on the current state of research on a particular subject area. So it gets us up to date, up to speed on what's being studied on social media use in terms of teenagers' mental health, for example. So that me as the reader can go, oh, okay, I see this is where the current status of that topic is. And another thing that it does, and this is very helpful for the student who's getting ready to do the research later in another class or at a different point, it helps that student identify what gaps are existing, what still needs to be done on this topic. And usually that's where the student researcher can start to say, oh, I see. So we don't have any studies done on this particular aspect of this topic. That's what I'm going to do. And again, setting up the future research. All right. So when we talk about the review portions, we understood the literature being the peer-reviewed research done on a topic. With the or the review portion, what we mean is we are going to read and we're going to take snapshots of these major themes and concepts and patterns and trends. So, what are the trends in the research in terms of mental health of Instagram use on teenagers or adolescents? What trends keep popping up? What do we keep seeing? Maybe we're looking at the effects of COVID on um, elementary school learners during the pandemic. What trends keep popping up? That's what we mean by the review is we're going to read these studies and say, oh, what do they have in common? How do they connect? What do I keep seeing as research topics and um, outcomes that keep popping up as I read about the effects of COVID, the pandemic, on children's ability to be literate, for example? That would be an interesting topic. So, as you start to read your literature and review it, you're going to start to see patterns that pop up. And this is going to give you an idea how you will organize your paper. So, for example, you might start to see a chronological pattern or advancements. Maybe we're talking about immunization technology and we start to see about advancements in that. Maybe there are common research questions that keep popping up. So these themes. So your goal in terms of this paper, and this is the review portion, is to map out what the research says. You aren't trying to prove a point right now. You're simply trying to say, okay, what have I just read? How can I organize it? So you have to start always, always with that very specific research question, and it should be narrowed and focused. And that is what your first task as you start to do this paper will be to find some research topic that's interesting to you. And again, I have that list, and you want to watch that Monday memo video. And you're going to start to narrow it down because you can't look at everything. There's so much information out there. You have to be super narrowed and focused. So, for example, something that's too broad is just simply social media and mental health. That's clearly too broad. If we narrow it down, we could say, what's the impact of Instagram? Or we could say TikTok or Snapchat or something specific on teenage self esteem. Then we start to get something that's more, something we could get a handle on. Once we feel like we've got a pretty narrow research question, and it's really good to frame, let me go back, it's really good to frame it up in terms of a question because you could start trying to answer that. So, what research is going on in the past 5 years? And I'm going to recommend, and we'll get into that, that your research is relatively new. For most of you, that's what you want to be looking at is stuff that's no older than, say, 2020 timeframe. So you will start to use those skills you had from English 111 in terms of using the library's database to come up with those keywords and terms. Your first real assignment that's due at the end of week one of this paper will have you narrowing your topic and coming up with those keywords and those search strings so you can find articles at the databases. Then you're going to start to review the literature. And what this means is you're going to start to read these articles and annotate them and take notes on them, which is why I'm making you do an annotated bibliography. It's really important that you spend the time to do this note taking because you can't really write your paper and organize your paper until you really understand what your articles have said. It's super important that you start to take notes and start to see what trends emerge as you read through this. However, that being said, you aren't going to approach your paper looking for articles by having trends or organization in mind ahead of time. You don't know that. The organization has to come from the research. You're not going to look for organization. You're not going to look for impacts or trends ahead of time. You really have to just find your articles and read them and take notes on them. And then you'll say, oh, I see what these researchers have been doing. And then you can start to identify your categories. This is much later in the semester. At this point, we're talking about maybe probably into the end of March when you're going to be developing your organization patterns, if we're putting it on our time frame. Final thoughts. Remember, what you're doing is something really objective. You are reporting on the trends in research. It is not just an annotated bibliography. This requires thought on your part. It requires you to read your 5 or 6 articles and start to think about what those scientists really were discovering about that research topic. Um, were they looking for effects on family members? Were they looking for effects on, if we're back to that mental health on teenagers, we're looking for the effects on students' mental health at home or their interactions with their peers, interactions with their parents. So those things you will not know until you read the studies. Okay. I hope that's, this gives you a glimmer. I thought maybe I would pull up an sample paper real quick at the end to kind of show you what I'm talking about when we go in terms of these organizational paths. So, this is a paper written by a student of mine from last semester who is investigating what was being studied about the impact of pet ownership on individuals with autism. This is a very typical kind of topic for a literature review, and you could see this might have been done by a sociologist or by a psychologist or a therapist. So, this student came up after doing the research, discovered. So, here we had the student's basic statement. This is the topic of research. This review synthesizes current research findings regarding the influence of companion animals on individuals with autism and their families, with particular attention to the mechanisms through which these relationships may support social development and family well being. So, the student had an idea they wanted to write about. Hey, what areas of people who had a diagnosis of autism, what areas of their life would being a pet owner impact them? So after reading the research, the student discovered that the research focused some of it on the social skills development and the pro-social behavior of individuals with autism, and that pet ownership could affect that positively or negatively, but it definitely affected social skills development and pro-social behavior. Student also found that lots of the articles, I think 3 of them, addressed family dynamics and the well-being of the parents of people with autism who owned service animals or emotional support animals in terms of research. So lots of the research, I want to say it was one, two, at least two of the articles um, really focused in on not just the individuals with autism, but the family dynamics. And then the third topic that this student discovered that these researchers really kind of honed in on had to do with the relationship of the individual and their pet. Okay, the quality of the human animal relationship is being important to the outcome of the patient. Okay, so in this case, there were 2 articles that the student found, no, 3 articles that the student found that looked at this particular aspect. So I will say that the student didn't go into this research project, this literature review, with these categories in mind. This is what the student discovered after reading the articles that, oh, some researchers were looking at this aspect, whereas other researchers were looking at the aspect of family dynamics, whereas others were looking at the aspect of social skill development in those people with autism. So, I hope this gives you a little bit of a better idea. Um, in the conclusion, the student determined that future research still needed to be done on long-term impacts of pet ownership and social skill development, particularly through longitudinal studies. So this, if you were interested in this particular research topic, if you were a psychology major, you might say, "Oh, okay, I'm gonna start to do some research on this aspect of social um, people with autism and animal pet ownership." All right. We'll get into more of that later. Um, this has turned into a long video, so I'm going to go ahead and close it now.